Hey guys, tonight we are going to do something a little different. We're not stepping into a bustling city or a glittering palace. Instead, I want you to get comfortable. Maybe pull the blankets up a little higher as we gently pry open the cover of a very old, very dark storybook. This is a journey into folklore, into the space where true crime and fairy tales get tangled up. It's a story you might think you know, but its real-life roots are far more unsettling than the version whispered to children. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to see where you're listening from. So drop your city and the time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins, as so many of these tales do, in a hushed room, perhaps with the sound of rain tapping against a window pane. You are a child, and someone is telling you a story to warn you about the dangers of curiosity and the secrets that men can keep. The story is called Bluebeard. You're retold of a nobleman of immense wealth and mysterious origins. He is powerful, but there is something unsettling about him. They say he has a beard so dark, so coarse, that in certain lights, it gleams with a strange blue-black sheen, earning him his famous name. Despite this oddity, and the fact that he has been married many times before, with each wife having mysteriously vanished, a young woman from a desperate family agrees to marry him. She is brought to his castle, a place of staggering luxury. He shows her every room, every treasure, and hands her a great ring of keys. All of this is yours. He tells her, go anywhere you please, open any door, except for one. He points to a small, insignificant-looking key. This one opens the little room at the end of the long gallery on the ground floor. You must never, ever go in there. Of course, the moment he leaves on a journey, the seed of curiosity he planted begins to sprout. The wife cannot think of anything but the forbidden room. What could be inside? Why is it the only place she cannot go? The temptation becomes unbearable. She takes the little key, her hand trembling, and makes her way to the end of the gallery. She puts the key in the lock. It turns. She opens the door, and at first, she sees nothing. The room is dark, but as her eyes adjust, she sees the truth. The room is a silent, terrible gallery of all his previous wives. In that moment of dawning horror, she drops the key. When she picks it up, she sees a single, dark red stain on it, a stain that will not come clean, no matter how much she scrubs. It is the indelible mark of her disobedience, and of the terrible knowledge she now possesses. Bluebeard returns unexpectedly, sees the stained key, and a calm, terrifying rage comes over him. He tells her that she will now join the others in the forbidden room. This version of the story, the one with the last-minute rescue by the Weiss brothers, was made famous by the French author Charles Perrault in 1697. It became a staple of children's literature, a cautionary tale filed away with Little Red Riding Hood and Cinderella. Folklore sites even have a classification for it. Tale type 312, The Maiden Tiller, a story that appears in various forms all over the world. But here is where our own story begins. For centuries, historians and folklore sites have debated the tale's origins. Is it just a metaphor for the dangers of marriage and the secrets of the human heart? Or is it, as some have long suspected, a distorted echo of a real historical event? The academic world is still divided on how direct the connection is, but many believe the dark seed of the Bluebeard legend was planted by the life and trial of a real man. A man who was not a mysterious nobleman from a fairy tale, but a celebrated national hero of France. A man who fought alongside Joan of Arc. A man whose downfall was so shocking, so horrific, that his real crimes had to be softened and transformed into folklore before they could be told to children. Tonight, we are going to look for that man. We are going to find the real Bluebeard. Let's put the storybook down for a moment, just for this chapter, and wind the clock back, not to a hushed, rainy night, but to the year 1429. You are standing on a muddy field in the Loire Valley, The air is cold, and it carries the metallic scent of rain and steel. This is France, but it is a broken, desperate kingdom, a nation on its knees after decades of brutal war with the English. Hope is a currency more precious and far rarer than gold. And it is here that you first see him, not as a monster, not as a bogeyman, but as a hero. His name is Gilles de Rais. He is young, only in his mid-20s, handsome, and born into one of the most powerful and ancient noble families in Brittany. He is the Baron de Rais, Lord of Ingrans, and a dozen other castles. He is, by any measure, one of the wealthiest men in the entire region. But he is not in his lavish castles. He is here, in the maddened cold, clad in shining, custom-fitted plate armor that gleams even in the weak light. He is a commander in the French army, and a good one. He carries himself with the easy confidence of a man born to lead. But there's a sharpness in his eyes, a quick intelligence that sets him apart from the other brutish, battle-hardened lords. You see him directing his men, his voice clear and commanding over the din of the camp. He is known for his unflinching courage in battle, a man who leads from the front. This is the historical Gilles de Rais, a man of immense privilege who, by all accounts, is fulfilling his duty to his king and country with honor and skill. And it is at this desperate moment in France's history that his path collides with destiny, in the form of a strange, charismatic teenage peasant girl who claims to hear the voice of God, Joan of Arc. When Joan arrives at the French court at Chinon, she is a puzzle. Many of the old, cynical commanders mock her, but Gilles de Rais, along with a few other key figures, is one of the first and most ardent believers in her divine mission. He sees something in her, a purity of purpose that seems to cut through the political maneuvering and despair of the court. He pledges his sword, his wealth, and his men to her cause. This is the mainstream historical fact that forms the foundation of his heroic legend. Gilles de Rais became Joan of Arc's brother-in-arms, her appointed protector. You see them together often, the unlikely pair, the peasant girl visionary and the fabulously wealthy young baron. He escorts her, advises her on military matters, and fights fiercely at her side during the legendary Siege of Orleans, the battle that turned the tide of the entire 100 Years' War. Gilles de Rais is there, a key commander in the miraculous victory that makes Joan a living saint in the eyes of the French people. The pinnacle of his glory comes just a few months later, at the coronation of the Dauphin as King Charles VI in the magnificent cathedral at Reims. This is the culmination of Joan's mission, and at this sacred, historic event, Gilles de Rais is given a place of supreme honor. Here is a quirky, little-known detail. He is one of the few lords chosen to go and fetch the Saint Paul, the sacred flask of oil used to anoint French kings, a relic believed to have been brought from heaven by a dove for the baptism of King Clovis. At this moment, he is not just a warrior. He is a pillar of the kingdom, a man entrusted with its most sacred traditions. In recognition of his service, his loyalty, and his valor, the newly crowned king names Gilles de Rais a Marshal of France. It is the highest military honor in the land. Historians still debate the true nature of their bond. Was Gilles a genuinely pious man who believed in Joan's divine calling? Was he a shrewd opportunist who saw her as a powerful symbol to rally the troops? Or was he simply a young, idealistic soldier captivated by her extraordinary charisma? We can never truly know. But what is undeniable is that in the eyes of the court and the people of France, he was her loyal champion. So fix this image of him in your mind. Forget the name Bluebeard. See Gilles de Rais as his contemporaries saw him in 1429. A dashing war hero, a trusted companion to a saint, a patriot who helped save his nation, and a marshal of France, honored by his king. He is the hero of the story, a man at the absolute zenith of his life. The year is now 1432. The great victory at Orleans is a fresh, proud memory, but the mood in France has soured. The war grinds on, and the pure, spiritual fervor that surrounded Joan of Arc has been extinguished. Joan herself, captured by the English and their allies, has been tried for heresy and burned at the stake. Her death casts a long, dark shadow over the men who fought beside her, a reminder of their failure to save her. It is in this atmosphere of disillusionment that Gilles de Rais, now just shy of 30, makes a life-altering decision. He retires from the war. He hangs up his shining armor, leaves the muddy battlefields and the cynical politics of the royal court behind, and returns to his own vast domains in Brittany and the Loire Valley. You watch him as he rides through the gates of his favorite castle. Jump to see Sir Loire. It is a formidable fortress, with massive stone towers overlooking the river, a symbol of his family as ancient power. Dear, he is not just a marshal, he is a sovereign in his own miniature kingdom. His lands are extensive, his wealth is legendary, and his power is, in this region, second only to the Duke of Brittany himself. His return is a cause for celebration. The war hero has come home. He is still a young man, but he carries the immense prestige of his military career. He is a figure of awe and respect to the thousands of peasants and townspeople who live on his lands. They see him as a great lord, their protector, the man who fought beside the Holy Maid. He settles into the life of a great feudal nobleman. His days are filled with the pursuits proper to his station, hunting in his private forests, managing the affairs of his estates, and presiding over his court. His personal retinue is enormous. He surrounds himself with a crowd of loyal retainers, household knights, pages, chaplains, and servants. His castles are filled with activity, the halls echoing with the sounds of feasting and music. He is a married man, having been wed in an arranged match to a wealthy heiress named Catherine de Thouars. The marriage was a strategic one, uniting the great fortunes, but by all accounts, it is a distant and formal relationship. Catherine spends most of her time on her own estates, and she and their young daughter, Marie, are rarely seen at Gilles' side. His court is a distinctly masculine world. In these early years of his retirement, there is little to suggest the darkness that is to come. He is seen as a pious man, known for his lavish support of the church. He maintains a magnificent private chapel, complete with a choir of boys whose voices fill the stone halls with sacred music. This chapel, the Chapel of the Holy Innocents, is his particular pride. A small, odd detail is the sheer number of clergy he employs, dozens of priests and choristers, all on his payroll, forming a kind of private ecclesiastical army. Historians who have studied this period of his life are often struck by the contradictions. On one hand, he appears to be a conventional, if exceptionally extravagant, great lord. On the other, there are hints of an obsessive, almost fanatical personality. His piety is not calm and measured. It is theatrical and excessive. His generosity is not just noble. It is wildly, unsustainably lavish. There is a restlessness about him, a sense of a man who, having experienced the supreme intensity of war and the divine fervor of Joan's crusade, now finds the peace of everyday life to be unbearably dull. There is a scholarly debate about what this retirement really meant. Was he retreating from the world in disillusionment after Joan's death? Was he simply tired of war and eager to enjoy his immense wealth? Or was this the moment when, freed from the discipline and structure of military life, the darker aspects of his character were first allowed to surface? For now, as you watch him in his great hall at Champ-de-Cilly, surrounded by his loyal followers, he is still the hero. The story of his future crimes has not yet been written. He is simply the Marshal de Rais, a great lord at peace, presiding over his domain. But the seeds of his downfall are already being sown, not in malice or evil, but in a grand, spectacular, and ultimately ruinous obsession that will consume his mind and his fortune. The peace and quiet of retirement do not sit well with Gilles de Rais. The world of managing estates and hunting deer lacks the grand, theatrical sweep of the life he has known, the memory of the war, the pageantry of the coronation, the epic story of Joan of Arc. These things have given him a taste for spectacle, and he decides that if he cannot find it in the real world, he will create it himself. He embarks on what can only be described as one of the most bizarre and financially ruinous artistic projects of the 15th century. He decides to write and stage a massive theatrical production. But this is not just any play. It is an epic mystery play, a sprawling dramatization of the Siege of Orleans, celebrating his own Roland, especially the glory of Joan of Arc. You watch as his castles are transformed into massive production studios. He hires a legion of writers, artists, and craftsmen. He commissions a script, music, and elaborate costumes. Nothing is too expensive, no detail too small. The play, titled A Mystery du Siege d'Orleans, is a monster. It has over 140 speaking parts and requires more than 500 extras. The production is to be a spectacle of unprecedented scale. He commissions fabric of gold and silver cloth for the costumes, fine leather for the armor, and exotic furs for the robes of the noble characters. He hires professional actors for the main roles, but also uses his own household knights and servants. A fascinating and little-known detail is that he even had his personal choir, the boys from the Chapel of the Holy Innocents, perform the angelic choruses in the play. In 1435, the play is finally ready, but Gilles does not stage it in just one place. He creates a traveling production, moving his entire company from town to town in his domains, and even to the city of Orleans itself for a grand memorial performance. And he does not charge admission. The performances are free for all to see. He even provides food and wine for the audiences. It is an act of spectacular, ruinous generosity. You stand in the crowd at one of these performances. It is an overwhelming sensory experience. The stage is a huge, multi-leveled structure. You see actors portraying Gilles himself and the other French captains, their costumes glinting in the sun. You see a young boy playing the part of Joan, her words ringing out across the square. There are simulated battle scenes, complete with blunted swords and fake blood. There are angels descending from a stage-built heaven. It is a piece of grand, patriotic propaganda, a living monument to a moment of glory, conceived and funded entirely by one man. The play is a huge success with the public. People are dazzled by the spectacle, but behind the scenes, the financial reality is catastrophic. The cost of the production is astronomical, a black hole consuming Gilles' fortune at a terrifying rate. He is hemorrhaging money. The income from his vast estates cannot possibly keep up with his expenses. Historians who examine this period of his life see it as a key turning point. His obsession with the play reveals a personality trait that will define his downfall, a complete inability to recognize limits. He is a man driven by fantasy, by a desire to recapture the past and reshape it into a perfect, glorious narrative. He is no longer just honoring Joan of Arc. He is trying to become the hero of his own epic, a grand patron of the arts whose magnificence will be spoken of for centuries. The academic debate centers on his motivation. Was this a genuine, if misguided, tribute to his fallen comrade, Joan? Was it an act of profound narcissism, a way to ensure his own place in history? Or was it a sign of a deeper psychological instability, a man retreating from a disappointing reality into a world of lavish, theatrical make-believe? It was likely a combination of all three. As the play's triumphant tour concludes, Gilles is left with the rapturous applause of the crowds ringing in his ears, and a new, terrifying reality. The bottom of his treasure chests are beginning to show. The hero of Orleans, the great Marshal of France, is on the road to bankruptcy. His grandest performance has set the stage for his darkest act. The glorious, ephemeral triumph of the play fades, leaving behind a harsh, cold reality. The applause dies down, the crowds go home, and Gilles de Rais is left alone with his ledgers. And the numbers tell a horrifying story. The production of A Mystery du Siege d'Orleans, combined with his already extravagant lifestyle, has shattered his finances. You can almost feel the dawning panic within the walls of his castle at Tiffargestes, another of his immense fortresses. The constant feasting, the massive retinue of knights and servants, the gold-embroidered vestments for his private clergy, the jewel-encrusted harnesses for his horses, It all adds up to an unsustainable drain on his resources. He is land-rich but cash-poor, and his need for liquid currency becomes a desperate, all-consuming obsession. To raise funds, he begins to do the unthinkable for a man of his lineage. He starts selling off his ancestral lands. One by one, he mortgages and then sells his baronies, his castles, and his farms. These are not just assets. They are the physical manifestation of his family's history, the legacy of generations of powerful ancestors. To sell them is a profound act of shame for a 15th century nobleman. His family is aghast. His cousins, his wife's relatives, and even the powerful Duke of Brittany watch with alarm as the great patrimony of the de Rais family is broken up and sold for a fraction of its true value. Gilles is a desperate seller, and his buyers, other ambitious nobles and wealthy merchants, are all too happy to take advantage of his situation. You can picture the scenes: a grim-faced Gilles in a cold stone chamber, signing away the charter to a forest his great-grandfather had hunted. A notary with ink-stained fingers recording the sale of a castle that had been in the family for 200 years. Each transaction is a blow to his pride, a fresh source of humiliation. This period of his life is well documented, thanks to the survival of numerous legal and financial records. Historians have been able to trace the systematic dismantling of his inheritance. It is a slow, agonizing process. He sells a lordship here to pay for his squire's upkeep, a piece of farmland there to buy more expensive fabrics for his court. He is like a man trying to fill a bathtub with a teaspoon while the drain is wide open. A little-known but crucial intervention happens in 1435. His family, led by his cousin Guy de la Suze, becomes so alarmed by his financial recklessness that they petition the king. They ask King Charles VII, the very king Gilles helped crown, to issue a royal decree forbidding him from selling any more of his property. The king, likely persuaded by the powerful families arrayed against Gilles, agrees. Gilles de Rais is declared financially incompetent by royal edict. He is forbidden from entering into any more contracts without the approval of his family. For a man like Gilles, a marshal of France, the war here, this is the ultimate public humiliation. He is being treated like a feckless child. The decree is a slap in the face, a declaration to the world that he cannot manage his own affairs. It enrages him and, crucially, it cuts off his last legitimate source of income. The scholarly debate here is not about the facts, which are clear, but about their interpretation. Was this a genuine attempt by his family to save him from himself? Or was it a cynical move by his greedy relatives, particularly his ambitious cousin, to position themselves as the guardians of his property, hoping to inherit it themselves? Given the cutthroat nature of 15th century aristocratic politics, the truth is probably a messy combination of both. Now, Gilles is truly trapped. His pride is wounded, his reputation is tarnished, and his access to money is gone. He is a great lord who can no longer afford the trappings of a great lord. He paces the stone corridors of his castle, a lion in a cage built of his own extravagance and his family's legal maneuvers. He is desperate, and it is in this desperation that he turns away from the honorable, if ruinous, world of theatrical productions and begins to listen to whispers of a different kind of magic, a darker art that promises to restore his fortune and his power with a single, miraculous act. The path to alchemy and the occult is now wide open. The royal decree has slammed the last heavy door on Gilles de Rais' respectable options. The gloom in his castle of Tif Augustus is now thick and palpable. The humiliation of being declared a financial incompetent by the king he helped create gnaws at him. He is a great lord with an empty purse, a war hero with a tarnished name. Conventional solutions, prudent management, patient saving, are not in his nature. He is a man of grand, desperate gestures, and in the depths of this desperation, he begins to listen to new and dangerous whispers. It starts subtly. You can imagine a traveler, perhaps a wandering physician or a disgraced scholar from Italy, gaining an audience with the famously lavish, and now famously desperate Marshal. This visitor doesn't speak of loans or land management. He speaks of a secret art, a hidden knowledge passed down from the ancients. He speaks of alchemy. To the modern mind, alchemy seems like a foolish fantasy. But in the 15th century, it was a serious, if perilous, pursuit. It was a mystical philosophy and a proto-science, wrapped in layers of secrecy and symbolism. Its central promise was irresistibly seductive: the transmutation of base metals, like lead, into pure gold. This was to be achieved through the creation of the legendary philosopher's stone. For a man like Gilles, on the brink of ruin, this was not a fantasy. It was a lifeline. It was a solution as grand and theatrical as his own personality. He seizes upon the idea with the same obsessive energy he once devoted to his play. He sends out agents, seeking anyone with knowledge of the great work. Soon, his castles, once filled with actors and corbies, begin to welcome a new and more shadowy cast of characters. These are the alchemists. They are often men from the fringes of society, self-proclaimed experts, charlatans, and perhaps a few genuine seekers of knowledge, all drawn by the promise of Gilles' patronage and the legendary depth of his former pockets. You see Gilles in his library, no longer reading Valvalric romances, but hunched over arcane texts. These books are cryptic, filled with bizarre allegories and coded language designed to protect their secrets from the unworthy. They speak of the green lion devouring the sun, of the marriage of the Red King and the White Queen, of substances like antimony, mercury, and sulfur, which were believed to hold the keys to creation. A little-known but fascinating aspect of this period is the sheer number of these alchemical practitioners Gilles brought into his circle. It was just one or two. He set up multiple laboratories in his various castles, essentially running a competitive research and development program, pitting different alchemists against each other, all in a frantic race to produce gold. They get to work. His cellars are converted into workshops. Furnaces are built. Strange glass retorts and alembics are purchased at great expense, and the castle begins to smell of sulfur and other strange chemical fumes. The search for the philosopher's stone has begun. The historical debate here focuses on Gilles' mindset. Was his turn to alchemy purely a pragmatic, if misguided, attempt to solve his financial problems, or did it represent a deeper shift in his worldview? Many historians argue that for Gilles, the appeal of alchemy went beyond gold. It was about forbidden knowledge. It was about power. It was about finding a secret, magical key that could unlock the universe and bend it to his will. In an age where the line between science, magic, and heresy was dangerously thin, alchemy was a step into a moral gray zone. For now, the work is focused on metals and chemicals. The promises made by these shadowy men are grand. Just a little more time. My lord, you can hear them saying, we need a purer form of mercury. The alignment of the planets is not yet right. They are masters of the art of the expensive delay. And Gilles, in his desperation, funds their every request, selling off the last of his non-landed valuables, tapestries, jewels, silverplate, to keep the fires of the alchemical furnaces burning. He has turned his back on the world of chivalry and honor, and has stepped into a secret world of symbols and promises. He believes he is on the verge of creating gold, but the path he is on is leading him somewhere else entirely. The art of alchemy has a sister art, a darker twin that is often practiced by the same men who promise to turn lead into gold. It is the art of demonology, the summoning of powerful spirits to do one's bidding. And as the furnaces fail to produce gold, Gilles' new friends will begin to whisper of a faster, more certain path to riches. The search for gold was beginning, but it would lead him to a darkness far deeper than any mine. The alchemical furnaces burn day and night in the bowels of Tifagast's castle, but they produce nothing but ash, smoke, and expensive disappointment. The lead remains lead. The gold remains a distant, shimmering promise. Gilles' patience, never his strongest virtue, is wearing thin. His desperation, however, is growing ever deeper. It is at this moment of supreme frustration that the whispers of his shadowy confidants change their tone. One man in particular, An Italian priest from Florence named Francesco Pirolotti begins to exert a powerful influence over him. Pirolotti is young, charismatic, and learned. He presents himself not just as an alchemist, but as a master of a much higher and more potent art, the summoning of demons. You can picture the scene: a late-night meeting in Gilles' private study, the air thick with incense and the scent of old books. Pirolotti leans forward, his voice a mesmerizing whisper. The great work of alchemy, he explains, is slow and uncertain. It can take a lifetime, but there are other forces, powerful entities that are not bound by the laws of nature. A demon, he suggests, could reveal the location of hidden treasures, or teach them the true secret of the philosopher's stone in an instant. All it requires is a pair. For Gilles, a man who has always believed in the unseen world, first the world of saints and angels, then now this, the idea is not absurd. It is a logical next step. If God's servants would not help him, perhaps the servants of the other side would be more accommodating. He agrees. This marks a definitive and terrifying shift. He is no longer just a financial incompetent dabbling in fringe science. He is now, in his own mind and in the eyes of the church, actively seeking to traffic with forbidden powers. He is stepping over the line from misguided folly into outright heresy. Under Priolet's direction, the experiments change. The alchemical labs become ritual chambers. Circles of protection are drawn on the stone floors. Grimoires, books of black magic, are consulted. Invocations in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew are chanted into the darkness. Gilles and his inner circle of sorcerers begin to hold elaborate, nocturnal ceremonies, attempting to summon a powerful demon whom Pirolotti calls Baron. You can feel the suffocating atmosphere of fear and anticipation in the castle. The regular household staff, the guards and kitchen maids, would have been aware of these strange, secret rituals. They would have seen the strange men coming and going, heard the chanting from the locked chambers, smelled the bizarre concoctions being burned as offerings. A deep, superstitious dread begins to permeate the castle walls. A strange but historically documented detail from Gilles' later confession is his profound disappointment with these rituals. He complained that despite all their efforts, the demon baron never once appeared to him personally. Pirolotti would always claim to have spoken with the demon in private, relaying its demands and promises to Gilles. The demon, according to Pirolotti, was demanding ever more elaborate offerings and rituals, always promising that supreme wealth and knowledge were just around the corner. This raises a fascinating question for historians, and it's a point of serious debate. Was Pirolotti a true believer in his own dark arts, or was he a masterful con artist? A brilliant manipulator who saw Gilles' desperate credulity as a golden opportunity. The consensus among most modern scholars is that Pirolotti was likely a charlatan, expertly playing a role, using cheap tricks and psychological manipulation to control his wealthy patron and bleed him dry. Gilles, in his frantic desire to believe, was the perfect mark. The pact with the shadows is sealed. Gilles has now completely given himself over to Priolet's guidance. He has convinced himself that he is communing with demons, that he is a player in a cosmic game for the highest stakes. The financial ruin was the kindling. The turn to alchemy was the spark. But this embrace of demonology is the roaring fire. And a fire of this nature, according to the lore of black magic, requires a terrible kind of fuel. The demon baron, Pirolotti will soon inform him, is not satisfied with incense and chants. It requires something more, something living. The castle of Tif Augustus has become a place of dark secrets, a fortress turned inward on itself. The alchemical rituals have failed. The demonic summonings have yielded nothing but empty promises from Pirolotti, and Gilles de Rais is more desperate than ever. The demon baron, Pirolotti claims, is displeased. It requires more potent offerings to be compelled to share its secrets. And so, a new and unspeakable phase of the horror begins. It doesn't start with a bang, but with a quiet, chilling pattern of disappearances. It begins in the small, scattered villages and hamlets that lie in the shadow of Gilles' great castles. Trafalgar doesn't jump to see a child, perhaps a young boy sent to gather firewood on the edge of the Lord's domain. Doesn't come home for dinner. A teenage girl, hired for a temporary position as a kitchen maid at the castle, is never seen by her family again. A young beggar, a boy with no family to speak of, vanishes from the local church where he often sought shelter. At first, these are isolated incidents. In the harsh reality of the 15th century, life is cheap and precarious. Children run away. They get lost in the woods. They fall victim to wolves, or to the myriad dangers of a world with no police force and little social safety net. There are no posters, no organized search parties. There is only a family as private grief. A sudden, aching void in a small, crowded cottage. But then, the incidents start to form a pattern. The disappearances seem to cluster around Gilles' estates. The missing are almost always children or young adolescents, both boys and girls. They are often poor, from families with little power or influence. Many of them were as seen heading towards one of Gilles' castles, perhaps lured by the promise of a job, a hot meal, or a piece of charity from the great lord's household. You can feel the story being pieced together, not in official reports, but in the hushed, fearful conversations between neighbors, in the warnings whispered from a mother to her child. Don't go near the woods by Augustus. Stay away from the marshal's men when they come through the village. A peasant woman mentions to another that her neighbor's son vanished a month ago, and the other woman realizes that her own nephew, from a nearby village, disappeared around the same time. The testimony that would later emerge at Gilles' trial painted a chilling picture of how this was accomplished. Gilles had a core group of loyal retainers, men like his bodyguards, known by the names Henriette and Porto, who acted as his procurers. They would ride out from the castle and scout the local villages. They would identify a suitable child, often one who was begging or wandering alone, and lure them back to the castle with a kind word and the promise of food or work. The child, likely awestruck by the sight of the liveried men from the great lord's household, would go along willingly, disappearing through the castle gates, never to be seen again. A particularly disturbing detail, though one that historians still debate the veracity of, is that Gilles sometimes preferred children with beautiful features and fine hair, as it was believed these pure offerings were more pleasing to the demonic entities he was trying to appease. The line between his supposed magical rituals and his personal, twisted aesthetic preferences becomes terrifyingly blurred. This part of the story is the most difficult for historians to grapple with. The records of the trial are explicit, but the crimes are so monstrous that it's hard to comprehend. The academic debate often centers not on if the children were killed, but why. Was it truly part of a black magic ritual? As Gilles would later confess, was he trying to use parts of their bodies as alchemical ingredients, as some of the more lurid accusations claim? Or had the rituals simply become a convenient cover story, a theatrical justification for a man who had descended into a private world of homicidal madness? For now, these questions are unknown to the people living around the castles. All they know is that their children are disappearing. A silent, creeping dread settles over the countryside. They look up at the towering walls of Augustus, the home of the great war hero, the Marshal of France, and a terrible, unspoken suspicion begins to take root in their hearts. The protector has become a source of fear. The disappearances continue. A slow, steady train of the young and the vulnerable from the lands surrounding Gilles de Rais' castles. The pattern is no longer a coincidence. It is a certainty, a dark truth known to every peasant family in the region. But this knowledge brings no relief. It only deepens the fear, because the prime suspect is the most powerful man they know. You can feel the suffocating weight of this fear in the villages. The air itself seems different. People hurry home before dusk. Children are no longer allowed to play in the fields or wander the woods alone. A mother clutches her son's hand tightly when a man wearing the marshal's livery rides through the market square. Eyes are cast down. Doors are bolted earlier and more securely than before. The silence is the most terrifying part. There are no public accusations. To speak the suspicion aloud would be suicide. Gilles de Rais is not just a lord. He holds the power of high justice. He can arrest, imprison, and execute anyone on his lands for any perceived offense. His authority is absolute. The local priests, the village elders, they are all under his thumb. There is no one to appeal to, no one to turn to for help. You can imagine the scene in a village tavern. Two farmers sit huddled in a corner, their voices barely above a whisper. One tells the other that a shepherd boy from the next valley is now missing. The other nods grimly, glancing nervously towards the door. They don't say the marshal's name. They don't have to. They just refer to the castle, or the great lord. It is a conspiracy of silence, born not of guilt, but of sheer, paralyzing terror. The fear is amplified by the castle itself. The Augustes is a massive, intimidating fortress, designed to project power and inspire awe to the peasants. It is a place of mystery. They see the smoke rising from its chimneys. Sometimes at odd hours of the night, they hear strange stories from former servants who were dismissed or fled. Tales of odd chemical smells, of locked rooms, of the Lord's violent rages and his strange, secretive foreign friends. The castle, once a symbol of protection, has morphed into a real-life ogre's den. A little-known aspect of medieval rural life is the importance of rumor and folklore. In a world with no mass media, information travels through stories, songs, and gossip. The tale of Gilles de Rais and the missing children begins its life here, not as a documented crime, but as a local horror story, a dark piece of folklore whispered around the hearth. He is becoming a bogeyman in his own lifetime. The historical figure of the marshal is slowly being overlaid with the supernatural terror of a child-eating giant from a fairy tale. Historians who study the trial records note that the court eventually called dozens of witnesses from these villages. Their testimonies, compiled and read aloud, created a devastating mosaic of communal fear. They spoke of children who went to the castle and never returned, of being threatened by Gilles' men when they asked too many questions, of a lord who had become a predator on his own people. The academic question that arises is, how long did this go on before anyone in a position of power decided to act? The evidence suggests for at least 8 years. For 8 years, the disappearances continued, and the fear festered, held in check by the immense power and prestige of the accused. Gilles himself seems to exist in a bubble of impunity. He is completely insulated from the consequences of his actions. He is surrounded by loyal and complicit servants who protect his secrets. He is a man who has not had to answer to anyone for his entire life, and he likely believes he is untouchable. He has his rituals, his secrets, and his seemingly endless supply of victims, all while the countryside around him trembles in silent dread. The tension is becoming unbearable. It cannot last. A secret this large, this terrible, cannot be kept forever. The fear of the common folk is a silent, powerless thing. It can do nothing to stop the horrors. But in the rarefied world of 15th century French politics, other forces are at play, and they are motivated not by fear, but by greed and ambition. Gilles de Rais's strange behavior and escalating notoriety have not gone unnoticed by his peers. His enemies, and he has many, are beginning to circle. These are not men concerned with the fate of peasant children. They are powerful nobles and high-ranking churchmen, and their eyes are fixed on a much greater prize, Gilles' remaining lands. Despite his ruinous spending and the royal decree limiting his sales, he still controls several magnificent castles and vast tracts of valuable territory, and his rivals want them. Chief among them is Jean V, the Duke of Brittany. The Duke is Gilles' feudal overlord and has watched with a mixture of alarm and avarice as his most powerful vassal descends into madness and bankruptcy. The Duke sees an opportunity to absorb the vast race barony into his own ducal domain, consolidating his power. Then there is Jean de Mailles Tiaroa, the Bishop of Nantes. He is a powerful, politically astute churchman who serves as the Duke's chancellor. The bishop has a dual interest. He is a rival landowner, with church properties bordering Gilles' estates. But more importantly, he sees Gilles dabbling in alchemy and sorcery as a grave offense against the church, an offense that, if proven, would give him the authority to seize Gilles' property on behalf of the ecclesiastical court. You can sense the subtle shift in the political winds. For years, Gilles' prestige as a war hero and marshal of France has shielded him. Accusing such a man was a dangerous game. But now, the rumors are becoming too widespread to ignore. His financial incompetence is a matter of public record. His association with known sorcerers like Pirolotti is common gossip in noble circles. His political immunity is beginning to crack. His enemies start to gather information. They discreetly interview former members of Gilles' household. They collect the stories of the missing children from the parishes bordering his lands. They are not building a case out of a sense of justice, but rather compiling a dossier, a weapon to be used when the time is right. A little-known but crucial element of this conspiracy of rivals is the role of Gilles' own family. His cousins, the same ones who petitioned the king to stop him from selling his lands, are now aligning themselves with the duke and the bishop. Their stated motive is to preserve the family honor, but they also stand to gain control of the estates if Gilles is removed from the picture. The betrayal is coming not just from his enemies, but from within his own bloodline. The academic debate surrounding this aspect of the case is central to what is known as the conspiracy theory of the Gilles de Rais affair. Some historians, particularly in the 20th century, have argued that Gilles was largely innocent, a victim of a massive, coordinated plot by his enemies to frame him for horrific crimes in order to steal his land. They suggest the confessions were coerced and the evidence fabricated. While this total innocence theory is now largely dismissed by most mainstream scholars, the element of political conspiracy is undeniably real. Gilles' enemies were certainly not pure-hearted crusaders for justice. They were ruthless political operators who saw a perfect opportunity to destroy a vulnerable rival and profit from his downfall. For now, they wait. They have the motive, and they are gathering the evidence. But Gilles is still a marshal of France, a formidable figure. To move against him directly is still too risky. They need a pretext. They need Gilles himself to make a mistake, a public, undeniable blunder that will give them the legal justification they need to pounce. They watch, they wait, and they whisper in the halls of power, preparing the trap. Gilles, lost in his own world of dark rituals and secret crimes, is completely oblivious to the net that is closing around him. The political and ecclesiastical forces are aligned against him. The trap is set. All they need is for Gilles de Rais, the quarry, to make a false step, and in the summer of 1440, blinded by his own arrogance and desperation, he does exactly that. He commits a foolish, public, and ultimately catastrophic act of aggression. The fatal mistake centers on a castle called Saint-Étienne de Mermort. It was one of Gilles' ancestral properties, a fortress he had been forced to sell years earlier to the Duke of Brittany's treasurer. The sale had always been a bitter pill for Gilles to swallow, a constant, galling reminder of his financial decline. On a Sunday in May, for reasons that are still debated by historians, Gilles decides he wants it back. Perhaps he was overcome by a wave of nostalgic pride, or perhaps he believed the castle held some secret that would aid his magical quests. Whatever the motive, his method is shockingly direct. He gathers a small force of his loyal men-at-arms and launches a surprise attack on the castle. You can picture the chaos of the scene. It is Pentecost Sunday, a major holy day. The castle's new owner is not present, but his brother, a priest named Jean Leferron, is in the chapel, leading mass. Suddenly, the doors are thrown open. Gilles de Rais and his armed soldiers storm in, interrupting the sacred service. They seize the terrified priest, drag him from the altar, and take control of the fortress. This act is a monumental blunder. It is not a secret crime committed in the dead of night. It is a public, armed assault on another man's property. Even worse, it involves the abduction of a clergyman during the celebration of Mass. In the 15th century, this is not just a crime, it is sacrilege. It is a direct attack on the authority of both the state and, more importantly, the Church. News of the outrage spreads like wildfire. This is the moment his enemies have been waiting for. He has given them the perfect, ironclad excuse to move against him. The Duke of Brittany has a clear case of illegal armed insurrection by one of his vassals, and the Bishop of Nantes, Jean de Mailles T.R.O.it, now has an undeniable case of ecclesiastical crime. Gilles has violated the sanctity of a church and laid violent hands upon a priest. The bishop acts immediately. He excommunicates Gilles de Rais on the spot. This is a devastating blow. Excommunication cuts a person off from the church, denying them the sacraments and, in theory, condemning their soul to eternal damnation. It also releases all of Gilles' vassals and servants from their oaths of loyalty to him. In an instant, he is declared a spiritual outlaw. A little known but revealing detail is the speed with which the legal machinery moved. Within weeks of the incident at Saint-Étienne-de-Mermort, the Bishop of Nantes launched a formal investigation, an ecclesiastical inquiry. The stated purpose of this inquiry was to investigate the sacrilege at the castle. But this was just the opening. The bishop used this legitimate charge as a legal gateway to investigate all the other darker rumors that had been circulating for years: the heresy, the sorcery, and the missing children. The scholarly debate on this point is intense. Was the attack on the castle a calculated risk by Gilles, a desperate gamble to regain a foothold, or was it the impulsive, irrational act of a man whose judgment was completely clouded by his obsessions and his disregard for consequences? Most evidence points to the latter. He had become so accustomed to acting with impunity within his own domains that he failed to understand that this public act of aggression would have immediate and severe repercussions. The trap has been sprung. The hero of Orleans, the Marshal of France, has, with his own hands, given his enemies the sword they needed to cut him down. The legal proceedings can now begin in earnest. The net that had been closing around him for years has finally been pulled tight. His days of freedom are numbered. The fallout from the botched trade on Saint-Étienne-de-Mermort is swift and decisive. The gears of power, which had been waiting silently, now grind into motion with terrifying speed. The Duke of Brittany and the Bishop of Nantes have their public justification, and they do not hesitate to use it. In September of 1440, a formal order of arrest is issued. A company of the Duke's soldiers is dispatched to Gilles de Rais's castle at Machecoul, where he is currently residing. You can imagine the scene. The arrival of the ducal banner at the castle gates, a sight that would normally be a cause for respectful welcome. But this time, they come not as guests, but as agents of the law. Gilles is taken completely by surprise. In his arrogance, he seems to have believed that his status as a Marshal of France still placed him above the reach of mere regional authorities. He is, after all, a hero who helped crown the king. The idea that the Duke of Brittany's men would dare to arrest him in his own home must have seemed preposterous. But they do. The soldiers enter the castle, their armor clanking on the stone floors. A stark intrusion into Gilles' private world. There is no resistance. Gilles' household retinue, their loyalty already shaken by his excommunication, simply stands aside. The great lord, the man who once commanded armies, is now powerless in his own hall. He is arrested along with his closest associates, including the Italian sorcerer Francesco Pirillotti and his loyal bodyguards, Henriette and Poitou. The hero is put in chains. The news of his arrest sends a shockwave across France. This is not some minor lord or common criminal. This is Gilles de Rais, companion of Joan of Arc, Marshal of France. The public is stunned. How could a man of such stature be arrested for what seemed, on the surface, to be a simple property dispute, albeit a violent one? He is taken under heavy guard to the city of Nantes, the seat of both ducal and ecclesiastical power. As he is paraded through the streets, you can see the mixture of awe and confusion on the faces of the townspeople. They see a man who is a living legend, now a prisoner, his head held high with a defiant, aristocratic pride. He does not look like a common felon. He looks like a great eagle that has been caged. This moment is a crucial turning point in the public's perception. Before the arrest, The stories of his dark deeds were just hushed rumors, peasant folklore. But the sight of the marshal in chains gives them a terrifying new reality. If the Duke and the Bishop are willing to arrest a man this powerful, the whispers must be about something far more serious than the seizure of a single castle. A little-known but important legal aspect of the arrest is its dual nature. He was being arrested on the authority of the Duke for secular crimes, armed insurrection, and on the authority of the Bishop for ecclesiastical crimes, sacrilege, and, implicitly, heresy. This dual authority would lead to one of the most complex and controversial trials of the Middle Ages. The historical debate here centers on the legality of the arrest itself. Did the Duke of Brittany have the legal right to arrest a Marshal of France, who was technically an officer of the king and not just a regional vassal? The legalities were murky. Gilles' defenders, both then and now, have argued that he should have been tried by the king's court in Paris. Among his peers, the fact that he was tried in Nantes, by a court presided over by his known political and economic rivals, has always been the central pillar of the argument that the trial was a sham, a judicial assassination designed to steal his land. But for now, these legal subtleties are lost in the sheer drama of the moment. The great hero is a prisoner. He is locked away in the ducal castle of Nantes, the Château de Bretagne. The doors of the dungeon slam shut, and in the darkness, Gilles de Rais must finally confront the fact that his world of power and impunity has come to a sudden, brutal end. The stage is now set for his trial. The city of Nantes is buzzing with a nervous, excited energy. The trial of the century is about to begin. The accused is no less than a Marshal of France, and the case promises to be a spectacle of immense proportions. Gilles de Rais is about to face not one, but two simultaneous legal proceedings, a complex and terrifying two-front war for his life and his soul. You find yourself in the great hall of the Château de Nantes, which has been prepared for the occasion. The scene is a carefully orchestrated display of power. On one side sits the secular court, presided over by the Duke of Brittany's representative. This court is concerned with Gilles' temporal crimes, the armed attack on Saint-Étienne de Mermort, the abduction of Jean Le Ferron, and rebellion against his feudal lord. The penalty for these crimes is severe: imprisonment, the forfeiture of his lands, and possibly death. On the other side, a space of even greater gravitas, sits the ecclesiastical court. This is the court of the Inquisition, presided over by the Bishop of Nantes, Jean de Malestherouet, Gilles' arch-rival. This court is not concerned with castles or property disputes. It is concerned with the state of Gilles' immortal soul. Its purpose is to investigate the charges of heresy, apostasy, the summoning of demons, and other violations of God's law. The ultimate penalty here is not just death, but death by fire, the prescribed punishment for a relapsed heretic, ensuring both the destruction of the body and the eternal damnation of the soul. This dual trial system was a powerful and terrifying legal weapon. The two courts could work in tandem, sharing evidence and witnesses, creating a seamless web from which it was nearly impossible to escape. Evidence of sorcery from the religious trial could be used to establish a motive for murder in the secular trial, and vice versa. Gilles de Rais is brought into the hall. He is no longer in chains, but is dressed in the sober, expensive robes of a high nobleman. He carries himself with an air of cold, aristocratic fury. He looks not at the judges, but over their heads, as if they are beneath his notice. He is flanked by his co-accused, his retainers Henriette and Poitou, who look pale and terrified. Their fear is stark contrast to their master's haughty defiance. The proceedings begin. The head of the ducal court reads the secular charges first. Then, the promoter of the ecclesiastical court, the chief prosecutor, steps forward. This is where the trial takes its dramatic turn. The prosecutor announces that the initial charge of sacrilege has opened the door to a much wider investigation. He has, he claims, uncovered evidence of crimes so monstrous, so unnatural and against the law of God and man, that they defy description. This is the moment the whispers and rumors are brought into the light of a formal court. The prosecutor speaks of a great slaughter of innocents, of dozens of children lured to Gilles' castles over a period of many years. A quirky but important procedural detail of an inquisitorial trial like this one is that the accused was often not initially told the full details of the evidence against them, nor were they always allowed to face their accusers directly. The court would present a summary of the charges, and the accused was expected to confess. The system was designed to extract a confession, not to impartially weigh evidence in the modern sense. The historical debate around the trial's fairness is, of course, immense. The fact that his chief political and economic rivals were also his judges is a blatant conflict of interest that would be unthinkable in modern law. The Bishop of Nantes was not an impartial jurist. He was a hostile party who stood to gain immensely from Gilles' conviction. This fact alone casts a long shadow of doubt over the entire proceeding. Was this a genuine search for truth, or a show trial with a predetermined outcome? For now, the weight of accusation hangs heavy in the air. The two courts, secular and religious, sit like twin angels of death, ready to pass judgment. Gilles stands before them, a lone figure of defiance against the combined power of the two greatest institutions in his world, the state and the church. He has been caged. Now, his accusers will begin to describe, in horrifying detail, the nature of the monster they claim he is. The great hall is silent, every eye fixed on the grim-faced prosecutor of the ecclesiastical court. He holds a long parchment scroll in his hand. This is the formal list of charges, the culmination of the swift and secret investigation conducted by the bishop's men. What had started as a case of sacrilege and property dispute is about to transform into something far more terrible. The prosecutor begins to read, his voice ringing out with practiced, solemn authority. The charges are laid out in a series of articles, each one building upon the last, creating a narrative of escalating depravity. First come the charges that everyone was expecting. Gilles de Rais, you are accused of heresy and apostasy. You are accused of making pacts with demons, of using forbidden grimoires, and of attempting to conjure evil spirits for your own temporal gain. You are accused of consorting with known sorcerers and charlatans, chief among them the Italian, Francesco Pirulati. These are grave charges, enough to condemn any man, but they are only the prelude. The prosecutor pauses, letting the weight of the word heresy sink in. Then, he moves on to the next set of articles. These are the charges that connect Gilles' spiritual crimes to a series of unimaginable physical ones. The room grows colder. Gilles de Rais, you are accused of the abduction and murder of more than 140 children. A collective gasp, a ripple of horror, runs through the assembled spectators. The number is staggering, unbelievable. The hushed rumors from the countryside, the scattered stories of missing boys and girls, have been gathered together and presented as a single, monstrous fact. The prosecutor continues, his voice a relentless catalogue of horrors. He does not spare the details, which were gathered from the preliminary interrogations of Gilles' servants. You are accused, he says, of luring these children into your castles of Tif Augustus and Machecoul. You are accused of promising them food, work, or charity, only to lead them to their doom. He describes, in chillingly detached legal language, the alleged acts. The charges claim that Gilles would take a morbid, aesthetic pleasure in the terror of his victims before their deaths. They allege that the murders were often committed as part of, or as a prelude to, the demonic summoning rituals, their bodies used as offerings. A particularly disturbing accusation, and one that would have been especially shocking to the medieval mind, was the charge of sodomy. In the 15th century, this was a term used to cover a wide range of unnatural sexual acts, and it was considered a crime as grave as heresy itself, often punished by burning. The court was deliberately painting Gilles not just as a murderer, but as a monster who violated every tenet of natural and divine law. This part of the trial is where the historical record becomes most challenging. The details are so lurid, so extreme, that they feel almost like a caricature of evil. This has led to the core of the revisionist debate. Were these charges true, or were they a deliberate exaggeration? a form of character assassination designed to make Gilles seem so monstrous that his conviction would be a foregone conclusion. Historians point out that many of the accusations, pacts with the devil, the ritual murder of children, were standard tropes used in heresy trials all across Europe. It was a pre-packaged narrative of evil that inquisitors could easily apply to a suspect. One little-known fact is that the original trial records from the ecclesiastical court were lost for centuries and only rediscovered in the late 19th century. This allowed romantic historians and writers to portray Gilles as a misunderstood, tragic hero. The rediscovery of the actual records, with their detailed and gruesome charges, forced a major re-evaluation of his case, though the debate over their veracity continues. As the prosecutor finally rolls up the scroll, a profound and heavy silence hangs in the hall. The sheer scale and nature of the accusations are almost impossible to process. The man standing before the court is no longer just Gilles de Rais, the financially incompetent war hero. He has been officially and publicly branded as the embodiment of pure evil, a heretic, a monster, a fiend in human form. The judges look at him, their faces hard and unreadable. The weight of the entire apparatus of the church and state is now poised to crush him. All that remains is to see if he will break. The horrifying litany of charges has been read. The air in the courtroom is thick with revulsion and shock. All eyes now turn to Gilles de Rais. How will he respond to these monstrous accusations? Will he break down? Will he protest his innocence? He does neither. Instead, he draws himself up to his full height, his face a mask of aristocratic contempt, and unleashes a torrent of defiance. He looks not at his judges, but at the prosecutor, and speaks, his voice filled with the cold fury of a great lord insulted. "I will not answer you," he declares. He proclaims that he is a nobleman of high birth, a marshal of France, and that he will not deign to respond to charges brought by this court, which he deems to be beneath him and composed of his enemies. He scorns the authority of the Bishop of Nantes, calling him a Simon Iasi, a person who buys or sells church offices, a grave insult and a partisan. He dismisses the entire proceeding as a sham, a malicious plot concocted by his rivals to steal his inheritance. "I would rather be hanged by the neck by a dog's leash," he spits, than answer to a court lead by such a priest. This is an incredibly bold and incredibly foolish move. He is not just pleading innocent. He is attacking the legitimacy of the court itself. For the judges of the Inquisition, this is a grave offense. It is a sign of contumacy, a stubborn and willful contempt for the authority of the church. In their eyes, an innocent man would be eager to clear his name, while a guilty man, in league with the devil, would naturally scorn the representatives of God. The bishop, Jean de Males to Euroet, remains calm, his face a stony mask. He has anticipated this. Gilles' pride and arrogance are well known, and the court has a procedure for dealing with such defiance. The bishop warns Gilles that his refusal to plead will be taken as a confession of guilt. He urges him to reconsider, to show humility before God and the court. Gilles refuses. He erupts in another furious outburst, this time lashing out with a stream of invective and blasphemy so shocking that the court scribes refused to record it verbatim, simply noting that he uttered many scandalous and vituperative words. This moment is a psychological turning point. Gilles, a man who has never been challenged, who has always been the ultimate authority in his own world, is now reacting with pure, unrestrained rage to a situation he cannot control. His pride is his only remaining weapon, and he wields it recklessly. Faced with this defiance, the bishop plays his trump card. He declares that Gilles de Rais, due to his contempt for the court and his blasphemous outbursts, is once again excommunicated. This time, the excommunication is not just a preliminary step. It is a formal judgment made in open court. It is a powerful psychological blow. Gilles is visibly shaken. The reality of his situation, his utter isolation from the world he knew, seems to hit him. His furious bravado falters for the first time. A little-known but significant detail is the legal status of an excommunicated person in a trial. According to the rules of the Inquisition, The court could not technically pass final judgment or sentence upon a person who was outside the church. This created a legal paradox. To be judged, Gilles had to be a member of the church again, which meant he had to repent and submit to the court's authority. His very defiance was preventing the trial from reaching its conclusion, but it also guaranteed that the pressure on him would be immense. The historical debate here focuses on Gilles' motivation for this initial defiance. Was it the desperate act of an innocent man, refusing to dignify a corrupt, shown trial with his participation? Or was it the calculated arrogance of a guilty man, trying to use his noble status to intimidate the court and derail the proceedings? Or perhaps, most likely, it was simply the raw, unfiltered reaction of a narcissist who could not comprehend his own powerlessness. The first day of the trial ends with Gilles being led away, his face pale, the sentence of excommunication ringing in his ears. He has made his stand on the shifting sands of his own pride, but the court has other ways of getting what it wants. It does not need to break Gilles himself. Not yet. It can start with the weaker links in the chain, his servants. While Gilles de Rais fumes in his stone cell, convinced of his own untouchable nobility, the court shifts its focus. The grand theater of the main hall is replaced by the suffocating intimacy of a small, stone chamber. Deep within the castle, the air is cold and damp. Here, there are no crowds, no grand displays of power. There is only a table, a few stern-faced clerics, a scribe, and a terrified man. These are Gilles' lifelong servants and bodyguards, the men known as Henriette and Poitou. They are the weak point. They are commoners, men whose entire lives and fortunes have been tied to their master. They have no noble blood to protect them, no grand titles to hide behind. The loyalty that was once their shield has now become their cage, trapping them in their master's horrific downfall. You watch as the interrogators begin their work. They are not brutal or loud. Their method is far more terrifying. It is calm, patient, and methodical. They speak to Henriette and Poitou in low, reasonable tones. They explain the situation simply. Their master, Gilles de Rais, stands accused of heresy and murder. As his closest companions, they are accused of being his accomplices. The penalty for this is death by fire. At first, the two men are silent, their faces pale masks of fear. They deny everything. They stammer that their lord is a good man, a hero, a devout Christian. They know nothing of any crimes. This is the loyalty of years, a deeply ingrained habit of protecting their master. But the interrogators are patient. They begin to lay out the evidence they have already collected, the testimony from the villagers, the timeline of the disappearances. They speak of the sin of perjury, of lying to a court of the Holy Inquisition. They remind the men that while the court may punish the body, God punishes the soul for eternity. Then comes the offer, the slender, tempting branch extended over the abyss. The Holy Mother Church, the late cleric says, is merciful. She desires not the death of the sinner, but that he should turn from his wickedness and live. She is merciful to those who repent and aid the cause of truth. A full and honest confession, he implies, might be looked upon favorably. Their lives might be spared. Their souls might be saved. The pressure is immense. On one side is the terror of betraying the powerful Lord they have served their whole lives. On the other is the terrifying, immediate prospect of torture and a gruesome death, followed by an eternity in hell. Poitou breaks first. His face crumples, and a low sob escapes him. Then the words begin to tumble out. A flood of confession that, once started, cannot be stopped. Henriette, seeing his companion's resolve collapse, quickly follows suit. The dam has broken. Their testimony is the key that unlocks the entire case. They confess everything. They become the narrators of the horror, providing the court with a detailed, step-by-step account of the crimes. They describe how they were tasked with finding and luring the children back to the castles. They speak of the secret realms, the soundproof chambers where the deeds were done. They describe their master's descent from a celebrated hero into a monster, his rages, his strange rituals, his insatiable appetites. A grim, Little known detail that emerges from their confessions is the mundane, almost bureaucratic nature of their complicity. They reveal that Gilles handsomely rewarded them for their work and their silence. They were given money, fine clothes, and horses. Their confession paints a picture not of men forced into evil at sword point, but of men who became willing, paid employees in a horrific enterprise. The confession of these two men, soon followed by others from the household, is devastating. A question that has haunted this case for centuries is whether these confessions were obtained by torture. The official records are ambiguous. They state that the men confessed after being urged by the court. Scholars still fiercely debate whether physical torture was actually used on the servants, or if the sheer psychological pressure and the ever-present threat of it were enough to make them talk. Whatever the method, the result is the same. The court now has what it needs. It has detailed, first-hand accounts that corroborate the rumors and accusations. The wall of silence that Gilles de Rais had built around himself has been breached, not by his enemies, but by his most trusted friends. Their words are the nails being hammered, one by one, into his coffin. The confessions of Henriette, Poitou, and other members of the household have given the court a powerful arsenal. Armed with this damning testimony, the judges return their attention to the man at the center of the web, Gilles de Rais. He is brought back into the great hall, but the atmosphere has changed. The court is no longer just presenting accusations. It is presenting what it claims to be verified facts, narrated by his own men. The prosecutor reads a summary of the servants' confessions aloud. He details the methods of abduction, the names of victims, the locations of the crimes. It is a chilling and precise account. As he speaks, Gilles listens, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The fury seems to have drained out of him, replaced by a cold, silent stillness. He has been betrayed by those he trusted most. When the reading is finished, the Bishop of Nantes turns to Gilles. He asks him, once again, if he will confirm the truth of these statements. He urges him to confess his sins, to unburden his soul and seek the mercy of God. Gilles remains silent. He refuses to speak. The bishop's eyes, a theatrical display of disappointment. He has offered mercy, he implies, and it has been refused. Nil. The court must resort to its final and most feared tool. He announces that since the accused remains stubbornly silent in the face of overwhelming evidence, the court has no choice but to authorize the use of the question. A wave of dread washes over the courtroom. The question is the clinical, bureaucratic euphemism for judicial torture. The instruments of torture were an accepted, if brutal, part of 15th century justice, particularly in inquisitorial courts. The logic was that a person's body was weak, and that physical pain could be a tool to break the stubborn silence of a soul hardened by sin, allowing the truth to come out. It was seen not as a punishment, but as a method of interrogation. You can almost feel the chill of the dungeon as the bishop describes what will happen. Gilles will be taken down to the torture chamber. The executioner, the questioner, will show him the instruments. First, he will see the rack, a wooden frame where the victim's limbs would be slowly pulled from their sockets. He will be shown the thumb screws, the iron boots, and the braziers for heating pokers. The process was often psychological at first. The mere sight of the instruments, combined with a detailed explanation of what they could do, was often enough to break a person's will. This was known as territio, or the terror. If the threat alone did not work, the torture itself would begin, applied in escalating stages of severity. The court grants Gilles a final recess. He is given a few hours to contemplate his fate in a small adjoining room, accompanied by a few priests. The choice before him is stark and terrible. On one hand, he can maintain his defiant silence, a silence that he knows will lead him directly to the horrors of the rack. On the other, he can confess. This is the pivotal moment of the entire trial, and it is the focus of the most intense historical debate. If he confesses now, under the direct threat of torture, can that confession be considered reliable? The revisionist historians who argue for Gilles' innocence claim that his confession is worthless. the product of a terrified man choosing to say whatever the court wanted to hear to avoid unimaginable physical agony. A more mainstream view is more complex. While acknowledging the coercive nature of the threat, many historians believe that Gilles' eventual confession was too detailed, too filled with specific and verifiable information that the court did not already know, to be a complete fabrication. They argue that the threat of torture may have been the key that unlocked the door, but the words that came out were his own. A little-known fact is that the official trial record states that Gilles confessed before he was actually placed on the instruments. The threat was enough. This is a crucial detail for both sides of the argument. Did it mean he was a coward who broke easily? Or did it mean he was a pragmatic man who saw the futility of enduring pain for a lost cause? The door to the small room is closed. The great hall waits in suspended animation. The shadow of the rack looms over the proceedings. The fate of the Marshal of France now hangs on a single decision, made in a cold stone room, by a man who has finally run out of options. The heavy oak door of the deliberation room swings open. The priests emerge, their faces grey, and behind them walks Gilles de Rais. The defiance is gone. The aristocratic fury has vanished. In its place is a strange and unsettling calm, a hollowed-out serenity. He has made his choice. He walks to the center of the hall and kneels. It is a gesture of submission so profound, so contrary to the proud man they have seen for days, that it sends a ripple of shock through the courtroom. He asks to speak. His voice, when it comes, is no longer the sharp bark of a commander, but a low, almost weary tone. He announces to the bishop and the judges that he is ready to confess everything, more than he has asked, out of a desire to unburden his soul and seek reconciliation with God. The court grants his request, and what follows is one of the most infamous and disturbing confessions in the annals of legal history. For the next several hours, Gilles de Rais speaks. He does not need to be prompted or questioned. The words pour out of him in a torrent. A detailed, self-abasing monologue of his crimes. He corroborates the testimony of his servants, but he adds layers of psychological and philosophical detail that only he could know. He speaks of his descent into darkness, beginning with his financial ruin and his turn to alchemy. He describes his pacts with the demon baron, his frustration at the demon's failure to appear, and his growing obsession with the occult. Then he comes to the murders. He confesses to everything. He speaks with a chilling detachment, almost like a scholar dissecting his own monstrosity. He describes how he developed a taste for the suffering of others, how the rituals became secondary to the act of killing itself. He confesses that he targeted children because they were easy to procure and their disappearance was less likely to be investigated. He spares no detail, describing the methods he used, the secret rooms in his castles, and what he did with the remains. The confession is so graphic, so abominable and sordid amid echo, as the scribes noted, that at one point, the court orders all lay people, including the Duke's representatives, to leave the hall. The rest of the confession is heard only by the priests and the clerics of the Inquisition, deemed the only ones spiritually fortified enough to listen to such depravity without being corrupted. A particularly bizarre and little-known part of his confession is his attempt to frame it as a cautionary tale. He reportedly turned to the judges at one point and said something to the effect of, "I have done these things because of my own free will and my extravagant youth. I tell you this so that you may warn other young men not to be so reckless." It is a moment of profound, almost unbelievable narcissism. A man trying to turn his own horrific crimes into a moral lesson, in which he is still the central, tragic figure. The confession silences the court. The judges, who may have started the trial with cynical, political motives, are now confronted with a narrative of evil so complete and so self-avowed that it transcends their own ambitions. They have their monster, and he has, with his own words, painted a portrait of himself more damning than they could have ever invented. The historical debate over the confession's validity remains. Revisionists still claim it was a coerced masterpiece of self-incrimination, a story concocted to satisfy his accusers and avoid the agony of the rack. But the mainstream historical view is that while the threat of torture was the catalyst, The confession itself has the ring of psychological truth. It reveals a man of immense pride and intellect. The man who, having decided to confess, does so with the same theatrical, all-or-nothing obsessiveness that he brought to everything else in his life. He is not just confessing to crimes. He is authoring his own legend as the greatest sinner of his age. When he finally falls silent, the great hall is tomb-like. The dam is not just broken. It has been obliterated. The story is out. Gilles de Rais, the hero, has, with his own mouth, meticulously detailed his transformation into a monster. The confession is over. The doors of the great hall are thrown open, and the news of what has transpired within spreads through the city of Nantes like a contagion. It moves from the sober-faced clerics to the ducal guards, from the castle staff to the townspeople gathered in the square outside. The story travels on whispers, on guests of horror, on the frantic retelling from one person to another. Gilles de Rais has confessed. He has confessed to everything. The effect on the public is immediate and profound. Before this moment, Gilles was a complex figure, a hero accused of terrible things, a great lord brought low by his enemies. There was room for doubt, for disbelief, but the confession changes everything. It is a definitive, unanswerable declaration of guilt from the man's own mouth. You can feel the entire perception of a man, and of a nation's history, shift in the space of a single afternoon. The hero of Orleans is gone, erased. The companion of the holy maid Joan of Arc is a phantom. In his place stands a new figure, a monster of almost mythical proportions. The name Gilles de Rais is no longer spoken with reverence, but with a shudder of revulsion. The details of the confession, especially the most lurid and sensational parts, are repeated with a morbid fascination. People speak in hushed, horrified tones of the secret rooms, the demonic pacts, and the sheer number of victims. The rumors that had been whispered in rural villages for years are now confirmed, amplified, and broadcast from the center of power. The private fear of a few isolated peasant families has become a public, collective nightmare. The trial, which may have begun as a cynical end grab by his rivals, now takes on the character of a great public exorcism. The conviction of Gilles de Rais is no longer just a legal or political necessity. It is a moral and spiritual one. Society needs to purge itself of this monstrous presence. It needs to see him condemned, to reaffirm the boundaries between good and evil, between humanity and monstrosity. A little-known but significant aspect of this public reaction was the role of the church in managing the narrative. The bishop and his court did not release the full, graphic transcript of the confession to the public. Instead, they released summaries, official versions that emphasized Gilles' repentance and the church's role in bringing him back to the fold. This was a crucial piece of public relations. It framed the story not just as a tale of a monster, but as a triumph of the Inquisition's power to expose evil and save a sinner's soul at the very last moment. This sudden and total transformation from hero to monster is a fascinating case study in public opinion. It shows how a reputation, built over a lifetime of heroic deeds, can be completely annihilated in an instant. The Gilles who fought at Orleans and the Gilles who confessed in Nantes were the same man, but the narrative frame around him had been irrevocably shattered and replaced. The historical debate here is less about the facts and more about the psychology. Did the public's swift condemnation reflect a genuine horror at his crimes, or was there a kind of collective schadenfreude, a grim satisfaction in seeing a man of such immense power and privilege brought so low? It was likely a mixture of both. His downfall was a terrifying cautionary tale, but it was also a thrilling and spectacular piece of public drama. As evening falls over Nantes, the city is a different place. The legend of Gilles the hero is dead. In its place, the legend of Gilles the monster has just been born. He is no longer a man. He is a symbol of absolute depravity. His name is already becoming a new word for fiend, a new story to frighten children with. The trial is not even officially over, but in the court of public opinion, the verdict has already been delivered, and the historical figure has begun his inexorable transformation into a bogeyman. With the confession secured, The trial moves swiftly towards its inevitable conclusion. The proceedings are now a formality, a series of rituals to bring the affair to a legally and theologically satisfying close. Gilles de Rais, now repentant and submissive, is brought back before the twin courts for the final time. First, the ecclesiastical court deals with the matter of his soul. In light of his full confession and his stated desire for repentance, the Bishop of Nantes, Jean de Mailstier-Owet, performs a solemn ceremony. He lifts the sentence of excommunication, officially welcoming the now humbled sinner back into the fold of the Holy Church. This is a crucial step. It allows the court to claim a spiritual victory and, more practically, it makes Gilles eligible to be sentenced. He is no longer an outlaw beyond their reach, but a son of the Church, subject to its ultimate judgment. The promoter of the court then formally asks for a verdict. The judges of the Inquisition, their faces grim, deliver their findings. They declare Gilles de Rais guilty of all the charges on the ecclesiastical scroll: heresy, apostasy, and the invocation of demons. As a confessed heretic, his fate should be death by fire. However, the court adds a clause: because he has shown repentance, they will release into the secular arm of the law for the execution of the sentence. This was a standard, if slightly hypocritical, practice. The Church did not technically sentence people to death. It merely found them guilty of a capital religious crime and then abandoned them to the state authorities, who were then obligated to carry out the execution. Now it is the turn of the secular court. The ducal judges, their work made easy by the confession, declare Gilles guilty of the temporal crimes, the murders, the abductions, and the rebellion against his lord. The verdict here is straightforward. For these crimes, the sentence is death by hanging. The two sentences are then combined into a single, terrible judgment. Gilles de Rais is to be taken on a specified day to a public meadow outside the walls of Nantes. There, a gallows and a great pyre of wood will be erected. He is to be hanged by the neck, but not until he is dead. While still alive, he is to be cut down and his body placed upon the pyre, to be consumed by the flames. It is a sentence designed to satisfy both courts: the rope for the murderer, the fire for the heretic. A little-known but poignant detail of the sentencing is Gilles' final request to the court, in a display of his lingering aristocratic pride and his newfound piety. He asks that his two servants, Henriette and Poitou, who were also sentenced to death, be executed before him. He says he wants to be able to offer them spiritual comfort and counsel in their final moments, and to serve as an example of a penitent sinner for them to follow. He also asks that their bodies be spared the fire and given a Christian burial. The court, in a final gesture of mercy towards the repentant marshal, grants these requests. The historical debate over the sentence is minimal, as it was a standard punishment for the crimes he was convicted of. The real debate continues to circle back to the process that led to it, whether verdict's a just conclusion to a fair trial, or the rubber stamping of a preordained political execution. The evidence points to a messy truth. The trial was almost certainly initiated by Gilles' political enemies for cynical reasons, but in the process, it appears to have uncovered a genuine and horrific series of crimes. The motives of the judges may have been impure, but their verdict, based on the confession, was legally sound by the standards of the day. The judgment is delivered. The date is set. The city of Nantes prepares for the great, grim spectacle of the execution. The story of Gilles de Rais, the hero and monster, is about to reach its fiery conclusion. His life is forfeit. All that remains is the performance of his death. The day of the execution arrives, October 26, Sicilian. It is a day of immense public spectacle, a piece of grim, state-sponsored theater. The entire city of Nantes seems to have turned out. Crowds line the streets, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity, fear, and pious solemnity. The procession begins at the castle and wins its way through the city towards the execution ground in the meadows of Bayes. It is a slow, deliberate parade designed for maximum public impact. At the head of the procession walk the clergy, chanting prayers for the souls of the condemned. Then come Gilles' two servants, Henriette and Poito, their faces ashen with terror. And then comes Gilles de Rais himself. But he is not the defiant lord or the broken man of the trial. He is a new persona, one he has carefully crafted for his final performance. The great penitent, he is dressed simply, and he walks with a steady, calm dignity. He joins in the chanting, his voice reportedly clear and strong. He exhorts the crowds lining the streets to pray for him, to learn from his example, and to avoid the sins of pride and extravagance that lead him to his doom. His demeanor is so pious, so perfectly composed, that it has a profound effect on the crowd. The revulsion they felt is now mingled with a strange sense of pity and awe. He is not dying like a cowering monster. He is dying like a nobleman, a Christian martyr facing his end with courage and grace. It is, in its own way, his final and most convincing performance. They arrive at the meadow. 3 gallows have been erected side by side, with a massive pyre of wood built beneath the central one, the one reserved for Gilles. As he had requested, his servants are executed first. He watches their deaths, reportedly offering them words of comfort and urging them to place their faith in God's mercy. Then, it is his turn. He climbs the ladder to the gallows, his movements unhurried. He addresses the crowd one last time, asking for their prayers. He is the very picture of Christian repentance. The noose is placed around his neck. The ladder is pulled away. The sentence dictated that he be burned alive. But here, the final, ambiguous act of mercy occurs, whether by official decree or by the sympathetic actions of the executioner. He is allowed to hang until he is dead, or at least unconscious, from strangulation. Only then is his body cut down and placed upon the pyre. As the flames engulf the body of the once great marshal, the crowd falls to its knees, praying. A little known but fascinating detail of the aftermath is the fate of his remains. After the fire had died down, a group of high-ranking noble women of Nantes, in a final tribute to his rank and his family, petitioned the Duke to allow them to collect his bones. The request was granted. His charred remains were gathered and given a formal, Christian burial in the Carmelite Church in Nantes. This was an extraordinary honor for an executed heretic and mass murderer. It shows that even in death, his status as a great nobleman afforded him a level of respect denied to common criminals. Historians are divided on how to interpret Gilles' final performance. Was his piety genuine? Had he, in the face of death, truly repented and found God? Or was this the ultimate act of a consummate narcissist, a man determined to control the narrative of his own death, to die not as a monster, but as a tragic, noble sinner, ensuring that his final moments would be remembered with awe and pity rather than simple disgust? We can never know the truth of what was in his heart, but his performance was undeniably effective. He did not die as a screaming, defeated fiend. He died as the penitent marshal, a complex, tragic figure. The flames consumed his body, but his story, in all its darkness and contradiction, was now permanently etched into the memory of France. The man was dead. The legend was just beginning. With the dramatic execution of Gilles de Rais, the main act of the tragedy is over. The great monster has been slain. His soul, it is hoped, saved at the last possible moment. The city of Nantes can breathe a collective sigh of relief. But the story doesn't end entirely with the flames of the pyre. There are loose ends, secondary characters whose fates must be decided. What happened to the circle of accomplices, the men who enabled the marshal's long reign of terror? The fates of his 2 most loyal bodyguards, Henriette and Poito, were sealed alongside his own. They were hanged on the same day, their deaths serving as a grim opening act to their master's execution. Their confessions had been essential to the prosecution, but their complicity was too deep to be pardoned. They died as they had lived, in the shadow of Gilles de Rais. But what of the others? What of the shadowy sorcerers and alchemists who had led Gilles down the path to damnation in the first place? Their trials followed Gilles', but the outcomes were surprisingly different. The most important of them, the charismatic Italian priest Francesco Birulotti, faced the same ecclesiastical court. He was the man who had claimed to conjure the demon baron, The man who had arguably orchestrated the entire shift towards ritual magic and murder. The evidence against him, based on Gilles' own confession, was overwhelming. Yet, Pirolotti was a skilled navigator of the treacherous waters of the Inquisition. He played his part perfectly. He confessed, but his confession was a masterclass in shifting blame. He admitted to fraud, to faking the demonic apparitions to fool his patron, but he vehemently denied ever being a true heretic himself. He was a con man, he argued, not a devil worshipper. He wept, he repented, he threw himself upon the mercy of the court, and it worked. Instead of being sentenced to death, Francesco Pirolotti was condemned to life imprisonment. This lenient sentence has been a source of much historical debate. Why was the man who was arguably the architect of the evil spared the flames? Some scholars suggest that his status as a priest, albeit a corrupt one, afforded him a degree of protection. Others argue that the court, having already secured its main prize in Gilles, had less political motivation to make an example of Pirolotti. A little-known and rather astonishing epilogue to Pirolotti's story is that his life sentence wasn't very long. He was such a charming and intelligent prisoner that he managed to ingratiate himself with his captors. Within a few years, he was employed as a kind of magical consultant by other French nobles, and eventually escaped. He was later killed in an unrelated brawl, a mundane end for a man who had played a role in such epic horror. The fate of the other, lesser sorcerers and alchemists in Gilles' circle was similar. Most were found guilty of fraud or minor heresies, given prison sentences or forced to make public penance, and then they faded back into the obscurity from which they came. The court seemed far more interested in punishing the noblemen who had paid for the evil than the wandering charlatans who had supplied it. This disparity in sentencing is telling. It highlights the priorities of the 15th century legal system. The greatest crime, in the end, was not the heresy or the sorcery itself. The greatest crime was Gilles, a man of noble blood, a marshal of France, who had broken the code of his class, betrayed his Christian duty, and brought scandal upon the aristocracy. The servants who procured the victims and the sorcerers who provided the magical justification were secondary. It was the fall of the great man that truly mattered. The accomplices are imprisoned or scattered. The great household of Gilles de Rais is disbanded. His lands are forfeited and carved up by the Duke of Brittany and the other nobles who had engineered his downfall. The complex machinery that facilitated years of terror is dismantled, its pieces rusting away in dungeons or disappearing into the fog of history. The stage is now empty. The fires have died down. The crowds have dispersed. The great lords have carved up the estates. The story, it would seem, is over. The case is closed. The monster is dead. And justice, in its brutal 15th century fashion, has been served. You can close the book on the history of Gilles de Rais, satisfied that you know the truth. But can you? As the years pass on the immediate, visceral horror fades, a new feeling begins to creep in. It is the cold, quiet feeling of doubt. You find yourself in a library, perhaps decades later, reading the official accounts of the trial, and you start to notice things that don't quite add up. The narrative is a little too perfect. The confession is a little too complete. The repentance is a little too theatrical. And a small, persistent question begins to echo in the quiet halls of history. Was Gilles de Rais truly the monster he claimed to be? Or was he the victim of the most successful character assassination in French history? This is the great, lingering shadow over the entire affair. This is the heart of the historian's doubt. You begin to look at the case not as a tale of a monster, but as a political prosecution. You see Gilles, a man of immense power and wealth, but also reckless and politically isolated. You see his enemies, the Duke of Brittany and the Bishop of Nantes, men who had everything to gain from his downfall. Their motive was not justice, it was land. With this lens, the trial looks different. The judges were not impartial arbiters, they were his chief rivals. The charges of heresy and sorcery, while shocking, were a common tool used by the medieval church to eliminate powerful enemies. The confession, the centerpiece of the whole case, was extracted under the direct and undeniable threat of torture. Can a man's words be trusted when the alternative is the rack? And then there is the most unsettling question of all, the physical evidence, or rather, the stunning lack of it. The trial records are filled with testimony about secret rooms and the disposal of remains. Yet, after Gilles' conviction, when his castles were seized, there is no official record of any mass graves being found. No cache of bones was ever triumphantly produced to verify the monstrous claims. A little-known but powerful point for the revisionists is this cold silence of stone. The castles were searched, but the scores of bodies were never located. Where did they go? This is the foundation of the conspiracy theory that has haunted the case for centuries. This argument, championed by various historians and writers from the 19th century onwards, paints Gilles as a tragic figure. In this version, he was a flamboyant, arrogant, and financially irresponsible lord, but not a murderer. He was framed by his enemies, his dabbling in alchemy twisted into demonic pacts, and the local rumors of missing children, a sad but common feature of medieval life, were weaponized and laid at his door. His confession was a fabrication, a story he agreed to tell to save himself from the agony of torture. But just as you start to become convinced of his innocence, the doubt cuts the other way. You read the trial records again. You find that the rumors of missing children in his domains seem to have started long before his political enemies had any reason to conspire against him. You read the confessions of his servants, Henriette and Poitou. They confessed separately, yet their stories corroborated each other on key details. And you come back to Gilles' own confession. It is so bizarrely detailed, so filled with specific psychological insights and philosophical justifications for his own evil, that it feels less like a story fed to him by his interrogators and more like the product of a unique and deeply disturbed mind. Could a man invent such a portrait of his own monstrosity under duress? This is the central academic debate that rages to this day. On one side are the Gilles monster proponents, the mainstream view, who believe that while the trial was flawed and politically motivated, it uncovered genuine, horrific crimes. On the other are the Gilles victim revisionists, who argue that he was framed in a judicial land grab. The most likely truth lies in the murky, unsatisfying middle. He was probably a guilty man, though perhaps not of the impossible numbers of murders he confessed to, who was prosecuted for all the wrong reasons by his greedy and cynical enemies. It is this very uncertainty, this messy, unresolved nature of the historical truth, that creates the perfect breeding ground for folklore. When the facts are unclear, when the verdict of history is hung, the story takes over. The unjadedness of the real case demands a simpler, clearer narrative, and in the villages and towns of late medieval France, the people would begin to craft that narrative, forgetting the complexities of the trial and remembering only the simple, terrifying image. The great, powerful lord in his castle with a dark, terrible secret. The historical man dies, but the Bogeyman is about to be born. The trial is over, the historical record sealed, but the story is just beginning its real journey. It escapes the dusty archives and the cold stone of the courtroom and seeps out into the countryside, into the collective imagination of the people, here, in the taverns, around the winter hearths, and in the nurseries. The complex historical figure of Gilles de Rais begins a long, slow transformation. He is about to become a bogeyman. You can almost hear the process taking place. The grandmother, trying to frighten a wandering child into staying close to home, doesn't speak of the ducal court or the charges of heresy. She simplifies. She says, "Be good, and stay out of the woods, or the master of Tiff Augustus Castle will get you." They say he has a secret room where he keeps naughty children. The details of the historical case, the political intrigue, the financial ruin, the alchemy, they are too complex. They are the first things to be forgotten. What remains are the core, terrifying elements. A rich and powerful nobleman, a foreboding castle, a forbidden chamber, and murdered victims. The story sheds its historical skin and reveals the archetypal fairy tale skeleton beneath. Gilles' real-life identity begins to blur. He is no longer specifically the Marshal of France who fought at Orleans. He becomes a more generic figure. The ogre of Machecoul, the monster of Tirfaugastes. His name is attached to local landmarks, his crimes woven into the geography of the landscape. That dark part of the forest, that's where he hunted for his victims. The ruins of that old tower. That was one of his secret places. He becomes a genius loci, a spirit of place, but a malevolent one. A fascinating part of this folklore process is how the story adapts to serve a new purpose. The historical trial was about punishing a criminal and seizing his lands. The folk tale has a different function. It becomes a cautionary tale, a tool for teaching and social control. It is used to teach children obedience, to warn young women about the dangers of marrying powerful, mysterious strangers, and to reinforce the idea that curiosity can be deadly. The nature of his victims also gets simplified in the retelling. In reality, he was accused of killing mostly boys and some girls. But as the story evolves into the Bluebeard archetype, the victims become exclusively women, his wives. This shift is significant. It changes the story from one of pure, predatory evil into a dark domestic drama, a tale about the terrifying secrets that can exist within a marriage. Why this shift occurred is a topic of debate for folklorists. It may be that the theme of a murderous husband was a more common and resonant trope in folklore than that of a serial child killer. A little-known but intriguing piece of this transformation is the beard itself. There is no historical evidence whatsoever that Gilles de Rais had a blue beard, or any notable beard at all. The striking visual of the Bluebeard is a pure folkloric invention, a piece of powerful, memorable branding. It's a touch of the strange, the unnatural, that immediately signals to the audience that this character is not what he seems. It's the fairy tale equivalent of a villain's dark cloak or twisted staff. The story of Gilles de Rais is thus laundered through the generations. Each retelling smooths away a historical detail and adds a touch of folkloric color. The complex, contradictory man who was a hero, a spendthrift, a dabbler in the occult, and a confessed mass murderer is gradually replaced by a much simpler, and in some ways more terrifying, figure, the fairy tale monster. He is no longer a specific man who lived and died in the 15th century. He has become a timeless archetype of evil, a story that can be told and retold, its meaning shifting with each new telling. The historical events were the single, dark seed, but what has grown from it is a sprawling, thorny vine of folklore, legend, and cautionary tale that will continue to twist its way through the culture for centuries to come. The story has been wandering in the wilderness of folklore for over 200 years. The name Gilles de Rais is all but forgotten by the common person, but his dark echo, the tale of the monstrous nobleman with a secret, bloody chamber, persists. It is a local legend, a peasant's scary story. And then, in the year 1697, it falls into the hands of a man who will give it its definitive, famous form. That man is Charles Perrault. Perrault is a highly sophisticated figure in the court of King Louis XIV, the Sun King. He is a member of the French Academy, a poet and a scholar, but he has a peculiar hobby. He collects the simple, rustic folk tales told by the common people and retells them in a polished, elegant style suitable for the literary salons of Paris. He takes the raw, often brutal stories of the peasantry and gives them a moral gloss, a fashionable sheen. This is the project that will give the world definitive versions of Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Puss in Boots, and, of course, Bluebeard. You can imagine Perrault perhaps hearing a version of the old legend of Gilles de Rais, or a similar European folk tale of a maiden killer. He recognizes the power of the core story, but he also sees the need to refine it. He is not a historian. He is a moralist and an entertainer. He is not interested in the messy details of the 15th century trial. He is interested in the timeless, universal themes. So he strips the story down to its essence. He keeps the wealthy, mysterious nobleman. He keeps the forbidden castle and the innocent young wife. He keeps the central, brilliant motif of the forbidden room and the stained key, a powerful symbol of disobedience and indelible knowledge. He makes one crucial change that cements the story's place as a cautionary tale for young women. He adds the dramatic, last-minute rescue in Perrault's version. Just as Bluebeard is about to execute his wife, her brothers storm the castle and kill him. This was not always present in the older, darker folk versions, which often ended with the wife's death. Perrault's edition of the rescue makes the story more palatable as a children's tale. It allows for a happily ever after ending, albeit one that comes after immense terror. It teaches a lesson. Don't be too curious. But it doesn't leave the child in a state of unresolved dread. And, of course, it is Perrault who definitively gives the villain his iconic name. Bluebeard. With this single, memorable detail, he lifts the character out of the specific geography of August Nance and places him in the universal, placeless realm of Once Upon a Time. A little-known fact about Perrault's collection is that his Bluebeard was often considered the most controversial and least child-friendly of his tales. For centuries, editors and publishers would sometimes omit it from collections of his work, deeming its theme of domestic horror too intense for young readers. The publication of Perrault's Tales of Mother Goose is a massive success. Bluebeard becomes one of the most famous fairy tales in the Western world, and in doing so, the historical Gilles de Rais is almost completely erased, replaced by his fictional counterpart. The connection between the 15th century marshal and the 17th century fairy tale villain is a subject of debate for academics and historians, not a part of the popular story. Did Perrault consciously base his tale on the historical Gilles? The evidence is circumstantial. He was an educated man and would have had access to historical chronicles describing the trial. The parallels are certainly striking, but there is no definitive proof. It is this very ambiguity that makes the story so powerful. The historical case of Gilles de Rais and the fairy tale of Bluebeard exist in a strange, symbiotic relationship. The history provides the tale with a chilling hint of reality, the suggestion that monsters might actually walk among us, and the fairy tale takes the specific, brutal, and complex historical crimes and transforms them into a timeless metaphor, a story about the darkness that can hide behind a mask of wealth and power. You close the final, elegant page of Perrault's book. The journey is complete. You have traveled from a horrific true crime to a dark and enduring piece of folklore. You've seen how society processes its deepest fears, how it takes a man's real, unspeakable deeds and turns them into a story. The warning, a myth, the figure of Gilles de Rais, the hero who became a monster, now sits forever on the darkest shelf of our collective library, a historical bogeyman cloaked in the elegant prose of a fairy tale, his Bluebeard a stark and terrifying warning. The last words of the fairy tale fade, but an echo remains, a quiet still in the air. The story of Gilles de Rais, of Bluebeard, is a heavy one to carry into the night. But now, it's time to let it go. Picture the old, leather-bound book closing, its clasp clicking shut. The story is contained, locked away on a high, dusty shelf in the library of your mind. The shadows in the corners of your room are just shadows, and the sound of the wind is just the wind. Let the weight of the story dissolve. Feel the comfortable softness of your bed, the gentle rise and fall of your own breathing. Your thoughts can now turn from dark castles and forbidden keys to simpler, more peaceful things. Think of a quiet, empty field after a rain, the air clean and fresh. Think of the steady, comforting glow of a distant, friendly light. There are no more secrets to uncover, no more trials to witness. The journey is over. You are safe, and a deep, dreamless rest is waiting for you now. Just let go, and drift into the quiet.